The gymnasium fell silent as Captain James Mitchell, decorated Navy pilot with 3 combat tours, slowly removed his service cap and lowered himself to one knee. 200 parents and students watched in stunned silence as this war hero, a man who had commanded aircraft carriers and faced enemy fire, bowed before an elderly schoolteacher in a faded cardigan. What could possibly compel a military officer to break strict protocol and humble himself before a retired educator? The answer would reveal a debt that could never be repaid, a sacrifice hidden for decades, and a moment of recognition that would change everything both of them thought they knew about heroism. Captain James Mitchell adjusted his dress blue uniform one final time before stepping through the familiar glass doors of Lincoln Elementary School. The smell hit him immediately, that unique combination of floor wax, construction paper, and childhood memories that every school seemed to possess. He had given dozens of Veterans Day presentations over the years, but returning to his own elementary school felt different somehow. The hallways seemed smaller now, the water fountains lower, the bulletin boards exactly as he remembered them 35 years ago. Principal Rodriguez greeted him with enthusiasm, leading him past classrooms where young faces pressed against windows to catch a glimpse of the uniformed visitor. "The children are so excited, Captain Mitchell," she said, her heels clicking against the polished linoleum. "We don't often get someone of your rank visiting us, an aircraft carrier commander. They can barely comprehend it." James smiled politely, though the weight of his achievements felt heavier today than usual. 3 bronze stars, 2 air medals, countless commendations. Yet standing in these halls, he felt like that uncertain 8-year-old boy again. They approached the gymnasium where folding chairs had been arranged in neat rows. Parents clutched phones, ready to capture their children's interaction with a real military hero. Teachers supervised their classes with practiced efficiency, and at the back of the room, volunteers prepared refreshments for the reception afterward. James scanned the crowd, noting the American flags draped along the walls and the handmade "Thank You Veterans" banners created by the art classes. Everything was perfectly orchestrated for what should have been a routine presentation about military service and patriotic duty. "Before we begin," Principal Rodriguez announced to the assembled crowd, "I'd like to introduce our wonderful volunteers who made today possible." She gestured toward a small group of elderly women arranging cookies on paper plates. "These ladies have been the backbone of our school community for decades. Mrs. Chen, who organizes our reading program, Mrs. Williams, our lunch volunteer coordinator, and Mrs. Patterson, who has been mentoring our struggling students for over 20 years. James's attention sharpened as his eyes found the woman in question. She was slight, perhaps in her late 70s, with silver hair pulled back in a simple bun and wearing a pale blue cardigan that had seen better years. Something about her posture, the way she held her shoulders, seemed familiar. She looked up from arranging napkins and their eyes met across the crowded gymnasium. For a moment, time seemed suspended. There was something in her gaze, a kindness, a patience that tugged at memories he had buried long ago. Mrs. Patterson tilted her head slightly, studying his face with the same intensity. Her hands stilled on the refreshment table as recognition flickered in her eyes. James felt his breath catch. Could it really be her? After all these years, the woman who had changed the trajectory of his entire life without ever seeking recognition or reward? He tried to maintain his military composure, but his heart was racing in a way that had nothing to do with combat stress and everything to do with a debt that had never been acknowledged. The principal was still talking, introducing him to the crowd, but James barely heard the words. His mind was spinning back through decades, remembering a different version of himself, angry, lost, teetering on the edge of a future that could have gone very wrong. And this woman, this teacher who stayed after school when she didn't have to, who saw potential when everyone else saw problems, who believed in a troubled boy when he couldn't believe in himself. Ladies and gentlemen, children, please welcome Captain James Mitchell, United States Navy. The applause was enthusiastic, but James barely registered it. He walked toward the microphone on unsteady legs, his usual confidence shaken by the flood of memories threatening to overwhelm him. He had faced enemy aircraft, navigated aircraft carriers through stormy seas, made split-second decisions that affected thousands of lives. But facing this reunion with his third-grade teacher, felt like the most challenging mission of his career. He began his prepared remarks about military service, duty, and following your dreams. The children listened with rapt attention as he described life aboard an aircraft carrier, the responsibility of leading sailors, and the honor of serving his country. But his eyes kept drifting to Mrs. Patterson, who had moved closer to hear his presentation. Every few sentences their gazes would meet, and he could see her piecing together the connection between the decorated naval officer and the troubled boy she had known so long ago. Sometimes, James found himself saying, departing from his prepared speech, the heroes in our lives aren't the ones wearing uniforms or receiving medals. Sometimes they're the quiet ones, the ones who work behind the scenes, who see potential when others see problems. His voice grew stronger with each word. Sometimes they are teachers who stay after school to help a kid who everyone else has given up on. Teachers who use their own money to buy school supplies for children who can't afford them. Teachers who believe in you when you can't believe in yourself. The gymnasium had grown quiet. Mrs. Patterson's eyes were bright with unshed tears, and James knew beyond any doubt that she remembered him now, the boy who had sat in the back of her classroom, angry at the world, heading toward a future that looked nothing like the man he had become. As James continued his presentation, his mind drifted back to that pivotal year in Mrs. Patterson's third-grade classroom. He had been 8 years old, already labeled as a problem child by the school system. His father had abandoned the family the previous summer, leaving his mother to work double shifts just to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. James came to school hungry most mornings, wearing the same clothes for days, carrying his anger like a shield against a world that seemed determined to knock him down at every turn. Most teachers had given up on him by October. He was disruptive, defiant, and falling further behind academically with each passing week. The principal had already begun the paperwork to transfer him to a special disciplinary program, essentially a pipeline to juvenile detention for kids who couldn't conform to the system. James remembered the meeting where adults discussed his future as if he wasn't sitting right there, their voices filled with resignation rather than hope. Some children just can't be reached, the school counselor had said with a sad shake of her head. But Mrs. Eleanor Patterson saw something different. While other teachers focused on his behavioral problems, she noticed that he was actually quite bright when he applied himself. She observed that his outbursts often coincided with math lessons, not because he couldn't understand the concepts, but because he was embarrassed about not having the required supplies. She watched him during lunch periods, noting how he would disappear rather than reveal that he had no money for cafeteria food. Most importantly, she recognized the pain behind his anger, understanding that his defiance was really a cry for help from a child who felt abandoned by everyone who was supposed to care about him. The transformation didn't happen overnight. Mrs. Patterson began by implementing small, subtle changes that preserved James's dignity while addressing his needs. She started a classroom supply bin, claiming that extra materials had been donated when she had actually purchased them with her own limited teacher's salary. She created special helper roles that kept James busy during lunch periods, providing granola bars and juice boxes as payment for his assistance. She established after-school study sessions, framing them as advanced learning opportunities rather than remedial help, knowing that James's pride would never allow him to accept charity, but might accept a challenge. More importantly, she began to see past his defensive behavior to the intelligent, sensitive child underneath. When James acted out, she responded with patience rather than punishment. When he failed to complete homework, she asked about his home situation rather than simply marking zeros in her gradebook. She discovered that he had no quiet place to study, no adult supervision in the evenings, and often no electricity when his mother couldn't pay the bills. Instead of reporting these issues to social services, which might have resulted in foster care placement, she quietly began providing solutions. Mrs. Patterson arranged for James to stay after school in her classroom, ostensibly to help with bulletin boards and cleaning tasks. In reality, these sessions became intensive tutoring opportunities where she helped him catch up on months of missed learning. She taught him study skills, reading strategies, and basic organizational techniques that no one had ever bothered to show him. She also provided something even more valuable: consistent adult attention and genuine belief in his potential. For 2 hours every day, James experienced what it felt like to be valued, encouraged and challenged to be his best self, rather than simply managed or controlled. The changes in James became noticeable by Christmas break. His grades improved dramatically, but more importantly, his behavior began to shift. The angry outbursts became less frequent, replaced by genuine engagement with his classwork. He started raising his hand to answer questions instead of disrupting lessons. Other students who had previously avoided him began to include him in playground activities. Teachers in other subjects commented on his improved attitude and academic performance. But the most significant change was in James's sense of self-worth. Mrs. Patterson had given him something that had been missing from his life: the belief that he was capable of success, that his future could be different from his past, and that someone cared enough to invest in his potential. She never made him feel like a charity case or a problem to be solved. Instead, she treated him like a student with unique strengths and challenges, worthy of the same high expectations she held for every child in her classroom. By the end of third grade, James was performing at grade level in all subjects and had been accepted into the gifted and talented program for the following year. The disciplinary paperwork that had once threatened to derail his education was quietly filed away, replaced by recommendations for advanced placement. Mrs. Patterson had literally saved his future, redirecting his path from probable dropout and juvenile delinquent to college-bound student with unlimited possibilities. Years later, when James received his appointment to the Naval Academy, he would trace the beginning of that journey back to room 15 at Lincoln Elementary, where a teacher named Eleanor Patterson had refused to give up on an angry, frightened boy who just needed someone to believe in him. She had planted seeds that would eventually grow into a military career marked by leadership service and dedication to helping others, values she had modeled for him during those crucial after-school sessions where she had quietly changed the course of his entire life. James wrapped up his prepared remarks about military service and opened the floor for questions from the students. Hands shot up across the gymnasium as children eagerly asked about fighter jets, aircraft carriers, and life in the Navy. He answered each question with patience and enthusiasm, but his attention kept returning to Mrs. Patterson, who had moved even closer and was watching him with a mixture of pride and amazement that made his chest tight with emotion. "Captain Mitchell," a fifth grader asked, "what made you want to join the military?" It was a standard question he had answered hundreds of times, but today it felt different. Today, the answer was sitting 20 feet away, wearing a faded blue cardigan and the same gentle smile that had encouraged him through his darkest moments as a child. "Well," James began, his voice catching slightly, "sometimes we're inspired by the heroes we meet early in life, people who show us what it means to serve others, even when no one is watching, people who dedicate their lives to making a difference, one person at a time." His eyes found Mrs. Patterson's, and he saw recognition there. She knew exactly what he was saying, and to whom he was saying it. Principal Rodriguez thanked him for his presentation and invited everyone to move to the back of the gymnasium for refreshments. As families began to mill around, James made his way directly toward the volunteer table where Mrs. Patterson was still arranging cookies. Teachers and parents approached him with handshakes and thanks, but he politely excused himself, focused entirely on reaching the woman who had changed his life. When he finally stood before her, they simply looked at each other in silence for a long moment, 35 years collapsing into an instant. "Jimmy Morrison," she said softly, using the last name he had carried before his mother's remarriage. Her voice was exactly as he remembered, patient, kind, with that slight tremor that had always appeared when she was deeply moved. "My goodness, look at you. I always knew you would do something extraordinary." "Mrs. Patterson," he replied, his military composure finally cracking. "I can't believe you're still here, still volunteering, still helping kids. I've thought about you so many times over the years. I've wanted to thank you, to tell you." He stopped, overwhelmed by the inadequacy of words to express what she meant to him. "You don't need to thank me, Jimmy. Captain Mitchell," she corrected herself with a gentle smile. "Seeing who you've become, knowing that you're out there leading others and serving our country, that's all the thanks any teacher could ever want." She reached out and briefly touched his arm, the same gesture she had used to comfort him as a frightened 8-year-old. "I'm so proud of you." The conversations around them had gradually quieted, as people began to notice the emotional exchange between the decorated military officer and the elderly volunteer. James was vaguely aware of the attention, but military protocol, the strict rules governing his behavior in uniform, the regulations about maintaining proper decorum, seemed suddenly insignificant compared to the debt he owed this woman. She had saved him, literally changed the trajectory of his entire existence, and had never received so much as a thank you card. She had spent her own money, her own time, her own emotional energy on a child that everyone else had written off. And she had done it without expectation of recognition or reward. What happened next would be talked about in military circles for years to come, shared in teacher lounges across the country, and remembered by everyone present as one of the most powerful moments they had ever witnessed. Captain James Mitchell, a man trained to follow regulations and maintain military bearing at all times, slowly and deliberately removed his service cap. The gymnasium, already quiet, fell into absolute silence. Then, to the astonishment of everyone watching, this decorated war hero, this leader of sailors, this man who had commanded aircraft carriers and faced enemy fire, lowered himself to one knee before his third-grade teacher. It was a breach of military protocol that could have resulted in disciplinary action, but James didn't care. Some debts transcended regulations, some moments demanded recognition regardless of the rules. "Mrs. Eleanor Patterson," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent gymnasium. "You saved my life. You saw potential when everyone else saw problems. You invested in my future when I couldn't even imagine having one. You taught me what it means to serve others, what it means to believe in people, what it means to never give up on someone who needs help. Every achievement in my military career, every life I've been able to touch as an officer, every moment of service to my country, it all started in your classroom." The elderly teacher's eyes filled with tears as she reached down to touch his shoulder. "Jimmy, please stand up. You don't need to." "Yes, I do," he interrupted gently. "Every person in this room needs to know that the real hero isn't the one wearing the uniform. The real hero is the teacher who stays after school for a troubled kid. The real hero is the person who spends her own money to make sure every child has supplies. The real hero is someone who sees the best in people and refuses to give up on them. Ma'am, you are the reason I learned what honor means." As Captain Mitchell finally rose to his feet, the gymnasium erupted in applause. But more than that, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Parents hugged their children a little tighter, teachers stood a little straighter, and everyone present understood that they had witnessed something extraordinary, a moment when true heroism was recognized and honored, when the quiet service of an educator was acknowledged by someone whose life she had profoundly changed. In the days that followed, the story of Captain Mitchell's tribute to Mrs. Patterson spread far beyond the walls of Lincoln Elementary. Videos taken by parents went viral on social media. News outlets picked up the story, and messages poured in from around the world celebrating both the teacher's dedication and the officer's humility. But for Mrs. Patterson and Captain Mitchell, the most important outcome was much simpler: a connection renewed, a debt acknowledged, and the understanding that true heroism often wears no uniform and seeks no recognition. Mrs. Patterson continued her volunteer work at the school, but now she carried herself with the knowledge that her years of quiet service had made a difference in ways she had never imagined. Captain Mitchell returned to his duties with an even deeper understanding of what it means to serve others and the responsibility that comes with leadership. And in classrooms across the country, teachers remembered why they had chosen their profession, not for glory or recognition, but for the chance to plant seeds that might one day grow into something extraordinary. The real lesson of that day in the gymnasium wasn't about military protocol or proper procedures. It was about recognition, gratitude, and the profound impact that one caring adult can have on a child's life. It was about understanding that heroes come in all forms. Some wear uniforms and carry medals, while others wear cardigans and carry gradebooks. Both serve with honor, both make sacrifices for others, and both deserve our respect and gratitude. To all the teachers, mentors, and quiet heroes who shape young lives every day without seeking recognition, your service matters more than you know. Like Mrs. Patterson, you are planting seeds that may not bloom for decades, but when they do, they have the power to change the world. And to everyone watching, remember to thank the teachers who made a difference in your life. Don't wait 35 years to say the words that need to be said. If stories like this inspire you to recognize the unsung heroes in your community, please subscribe for more tales of courage, service, and the extraordinary impact of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Together, we can honor those who serve in classrooms, communities, and countries around the world.